was there a time or a place or a team, a certain year where um, of realization? Because I've had a realization in the past where, you go from one level to another, and then you just have like an epiphany where it's just like, oh, this is a different level basketball, different kind of basketball. Is that like lessons left and right that I have absorbed, and that kind of opened my mind to of like the possibilities of how basketball can be played, of how basketball evolves in a different way. There's not one way of doing things. Was there a moment or a time, or maybe a country for that matter, that opened up your eyes a little bit more, even more, just to have like a wider horizon and made you understand that there's a lot more that you didn't know up until that point?
Well, the great John Wooden, the historical and perhaps the most famous college basketball coach in the history of American sports, head coach of UCLA, of course. He once said, "It's what you learn after you know everything that counts." And I've tried to adopt that throughout the course of my career. And every place that I've gone, and every team that I've coached, and every management that I've worked with, and every staff that I've either hired or become part of, they all have different ideas. They all have different ways of doing things. And I think it's so important, as someone like me who's worked in many different countries in many different environments, that you recognize the critical nature of cultural competency, being able to know where you're coming from and to bring that to the table, but also being open-minded enough to understand where you are coming to or where you are going to, and accepting that there are differences and that there are different ways of doing things. And there is the importance to be open-minded and to being tolerant of those things. Not to think that you have your way and that's the only way. It doesn't generally get you very far. So I always try to make it a point to understand the environment that I was in, to learn some of the language of the place that I was living in, to embrace the cultural differences of those places, to recognize the different personalities that perhaps already were in place when I arrived there, and to make that work in such a fashion that I would grow as a person. I would help those people or those individuals that I was working with to grow also, and to make that a point of emphasis, whether it be through communication, whether it be through just understanding, whether it be through a sincere desire to recognize one another, accept one another, be patient with one another on a level that went beyond whether you feed the post more in this place or you shoot the ball with this particular technique and that pace. That stuff is secondary, and I think that was probably one of the very biggest keys to my coaching success and coaching career in different.
Yes, adaptability and embracing was the word that I think that I also was thinking of. And I had this topic later on in communication, but let's talk about that a little bit, because there's one thing that I wanted to add from my side, because I know that once you learn also more languages, speaking the tongue of a different culture makes you think a different way as well. It helps you. It rewires your brain. I don't know the anatomical or the biological, like significance of it, but it rewires your brain in certain ways, and it helps you to think and understand people in a different way, in a different light. And there's, like you said, there's not one way of doing things. You have to have these, pick up certain things from them by learning their language, by learning how they think. Because when you start expressing, you start learning and listening of what they say, how they say it, it triggers a different aha moment in you where you're like, oh, okay, that's where he's coming from, from in regards of like thought process. But
Yep.
In those situations when you were in all this, I mean, I was looking at the countries, US, Turkey, Russia, Greece, Italy. Am I missing something?
USA, Canada.
Yeah, USA, Canada. Yeah.
Did you say Israel?
Yeah, Israel, of course, yes, yeah. That's an obvious aha moment there.
Yeah.
Let's call it brain fart. But
That-
what cultural cues did you specifically look for in those countries that you coached? That maybe by learning the language or by embracing certain things, were there certain cues that stood out to you the most? Whether it was body language, whether it was intonation of a certain sentence structure that kind of helped you understand them a little bit better?
Sure. I mean, many, almost too many to mention. I'll give you some small examples in Israel. For example, you have to understand that there are many holidays there, some which are more of a serious nature, some which are more of a celebratory nature. You have to be willing and ready to adapt your practice schedule, even your game schedule, certainly your load schedule, according to those holidays. Very much the same thing in Turkey. There are periods of time where certain players may be fasting throughout the course of the day and eat only at night. And you better be aware of that in order to set up your practice schedule and your load schedule in such a way that allows these guys to make it through that period of time. Um, Certainly, Russia, from a linguistic standpoint, was very challenging. But it's not only the language that's different; it's also the mentality that is so very different. And you have to you have to recognize that and be respectful of that in such a way that allows you to communicate with people effectively and efficiently and in the proper manner. So when I come into the NBA, it was a whole different world. I'm American born, but I spent most of my time in Europe. When I came back after, 36 years to the United States, it was a whole different world for me. It was my native tongue, and these were people that I had grown up with. But the world of basketball in the United States and certainly in the NBA had changed drastically for all of us. The world has changed
Yes.
drastically. The internet and the media and the all of the different influences and influencers they've changed the nature of sport in general. And you working with younger people who are maybe a lot more part of that world than you yourself are have to be aware of that, have to understand the impact of those things, have to be cognizant of what motivates these guys, have to be aware of outside influences that may impact your team or your players or your interpersonal relationships. These are things that demand a kind of again, cultural competency or a kind of maturity or a kind of tolerance that really challenges you in terms of leading your people.